Started. Hello. We are reconvening for research in the era of generative AI. We are on to panel number 2, and our moderator is Jamie Petruska, professor of history at Rutgers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Francesca. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our panel on Thinking Outside the Box. I'll introduce our 3 distinguished panelists who bring a wealth of diverse experience and expertise to our event. First, Carrie McAuliffe, who's a part-time lecturer in the School of Social Policy at the University of Pennsylvania and teaches the course Democratizing Data, Critical Data Studies and Algorithmic Governance. Carrie has been involved with computational culture and history since her BA at the University of Tulsa, where she worked on textual markup for the Modernist Journals Project. After working in technology communications for HP Enterprise, she earned an MA in Digital Humanities and an MA in Digital Culture and Society at King's College London on a Marshall Scholarship. Her master's thesis focused on recommendation algorithms on streaming sites and on cultural anxieties and representations of surveillance expressed in theater performances, particularly in response to the Edward Snowden leaks. After graduating from King's, she spent a year and some in London working at the US-UK law firm McAllister Oliverius as a digital communications officer and research assistant on online harassment and revenge pornography and cyber exploitation. As a PhD candidate in English with a certificate in film and media studies at Penn, Carrie works across media studies, 19th century literature and aesthetics, history of science, computational culture, materialist philosophies, theories of the archives, studies of race and empire in the Atlantic, and Gothic and speculative media. Her dissertation asks how memory came to be thought of as externalizable and capable of inhering in or being conducted by matter. It engages with both 19th century British literature and science and the afterlives of these ideas in Atlantic circulation. She has particular interests in contemporary media and memorial objects, architectures that communicate these histories. Our second speaker is Dr. Nikki Agate. She is Associate Dean for Academic Engagement at Carnegie Mellon University Libraries, where she works with library faculty to ensure the library's programs and services meet and anticipate the research and learning needs of the campus community. She is also editorial director of the University Press. She is co-PI on Poem, an IMLS-funded open educational resource that focuses on critical data, algorithm, and media literacy skills, co-leads a seminar for humanities faculty on global humanities and critical AI, and serves on the Humanities Center leadership team. Outside of CMU, Nikki is on the Modern Language Association's Committee on Information Technology and the Steering Committee for Constellate. She holds a PhD in French literature from NYU and an MFA in literary translation from the University of Iowa. A longtime advocate of values and active leadership, she has been a co-PI on the Humetrics HSS initiative since 2016. And joining us via Zoom, we have Dr. Amal Hussain, who is based at the RIOS Lab, the Reflexive Innovative Objective Research for Social Justice Lab at Seton Hall. She is Director of Research at the Council on Social Work Education, where she promotes quality in research curricula across methods and paradigms in undergraduate and graduate programs. A seasoned social worker, educator, and researcher, she brings more than 13 years of service experience in diverse practice domains, including teaching research methodology, instructional design, private group practice, utilization management, and psychiatric crisis stabilization. She serves as a peer mentor for the NSF and has served on numerous diversity, equity, and inclusion panels. Some of her research interests include integrating anti-oppressive and empowerment models into curriculum, social and emotional predictive models, developing mentoring models to support early-stage faculty and researchers, and pathways for diverse faculty to tenure lines in academia. She has experience chairing conference symposia and teaching paper panels for the Eastern Psychological Association. She also lectures at Rutgers School of Social Work, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate students in a variety of courses, including research methods and human behavior in the social environment. She earned her doctorate in educational leadership and administration at East Stroudsburg University of Pennsylvania, and her master's in clinical social work was completed at the Rutgers School of Social Work with a certificate in violence against women and children. Her work has been recognized by the United States Senate and the General Assembly with a citation for leadership and academic excellence. With that, I will turn it over to Carrie for our first paper.
Great, thank you so much. All right, I'm just setting a little timer for myself. I'll bring up, my presentation is not super essential. I was just discovering that I followed a kind of humanistic conference standard of writing a paper and that's not typical in every discipline. So I ask that you bear with me, but I have a few different images here. I really hope that this joins the conversation that we've been having with other panelists. It's been resonating as we've gone through all of these different talks. Today, I want to talk to you basically a little bit about my research and the encounter I've had with ChatGPT and AI in that research, which is sort of self-reflexively about histories of computation and even automation. And my real questions and concerns for this summit has been about the performance of authority and the presentation or form of objectivity presented by AI, specifically through the chat box function. So let me start off. So this is in like 3 parts, basically. And I'm going to give you first a little context of what I've been looking at. So, and the title, The Unreasonable Authority of Artificial Intelligence. I had been looking at the 1960s Wigner article, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences, about the generalizability of mathematics and amazingly in all these different spaces, which in a way is a kind of dream itself of artificial intelligence and its claims. So something I've been looking at for a long time has been this text called The Ninth Bridgewater Treatise by Charles Babbage, who you probably know as the pioneer of the computer. And he was also Lucasian professor of mathematics at Cambridge and wrote about a lot of things. He had a lot of opinions. And in this particular text, this is an unsolicited response to the 8 Bridgewater treatises that were commissioned on natural theology, so the compatibility of science with theology and belief in God. And in this particular text, Babbage talks about the idea of mathematics giving a particular way of looking or imagining intelligent design that other sciences do not offer. And that in fact, the world may be organized by a sets of formulas that are only discoverable through really good math, basically. He imagines God as algorithmic designer, the universe running on this kind of algorithm that adjusts for moments of contingency. Those seemingly moments of contingency or miracles are in fact pre-programmed and set to happen. And in this kind of wild vision, he has this chapter on memory and the idea that every atom of the universe might actually contain and transmit the memory of every phenomenon that's happened. So he talks about the air as the ever living witness of the words we have said and the deeds we have committed, as well as the water and the earth itself. And this leads to this kind of forensic desire in the text, where he imagines that every criminal would be traceable back to its crime. And the idea is that if we could find the rules behind the movement of every little atom on its pathways, we could trace back precisely what had happened and also predict forward to what could happen. So you can see here a real imaginary that's compatible with contemporary imaginaries around big data and machine learning. More data, if we could get better formulas and models, then we could really say accurately what could happen. And his interest here too is also in restoring the past and witnessing the past. And in this section, he has this footnote that is basically I've been wrestling with for the length of my dissertation, which has been far too long. In it, when he talks about crime and criminality, this shift to this kind of juridical language, he has this footnote that's specifically about slave ships. And it's accounts of slave ships, conditions in the hold, and specifically moments where the enslaved were thrown overboard by enslavers to lighten the load of the ship. And I read it as a real concern with the kind of unwitnessed aspect of these events and the way that they are untried in any kind of juridical setting based on the language he shifts into. And what he's proposing with this footnote is not necessarily clear. You can see here, the footnote it becomes the whole page. So we talk about thinking outside the box. Part of this talk has been about these sort of boxes I keep moving in and out of that are changing shape or defying the expectation. So the text or the paratext becomes the body of the text. And I've wrestled with this for a long time, and specifically in how to talk about the connections between early computation and the histories of slavery and extraction that go with racial capital. And, you know, the standard move is to kind of do this evidentiary investigation, right? Can I tie Babbage to other anti-slavery writers, abolitionists, et cetera? And I decided at one point to just kind of toss my hands up and ask ChatGPT if it knew something that I didn't, because I really couldn't find very much writing about this. Now there's a Meredith Whittaker article where she actually talks about this. It's really good. And the connection between the plantation and dreams of automation and automated labor. Well, April 12th, 2023. So here's the next part. This is me and ChatGPT solo in the living room as I'm tearing my hair out about what on earth to do or claim about this really fascinating footnote and encounter. And I asked it, what relationship did Charles Babbage have to the 19th century abolition movement? And to my surprise, it had a really kind of authoritative and thorough answer. ChatGPT's claim here, and I'm not going to read all of it, but I have it here, is that Babbage spoke out publicly against slavery and used his influence as a prominent mathematician and scientist to advocate for its abolition. That struck me as quite overstated, considering the breadth of his texts are largely technical, and the social ones tend to do more with political economy, even taxation. But maybe there are more resources I didn't know about. ChatGPT continued from there, framing abolition as fundamentally part of Babbage's moral philosophy, a key part of his life's work. For context, Babbage loved to opine. He had ideas on everything, and he was known for being a bit of a curmudgeon and polarizing figure, a real thorn in the side for the people in the Royal Society. His writings are extensive and range from machines and mathematical notation to the organization of industrial labor, his distaste for public music on the street, the problem of written and oral transmission over time, and the game telephone, which was named something differently. Ideas on the occulting light for lighthouses, a concept for an automatic writing machine and train engines, his opinions on the state of science in Britain, new ideas for taxes in Britain, a short treatise on life insurance, including insurance tables, and on. But in all that, as far as I can tell, the focus is never, quote, social justice per se, which itself is a pretty anachronistic word if we think about it. In fact, the only direct textual reference I've worked with in this footnote in the 9th is really the only place where I start seeing this connection. So already ChatGPT is feeding me something that's been prompted by the way I'm asking the question, that I want to hear that this connection exists and how. So I says to ChatGPT, I says, what sources did you use to generate the last response? And I expected it to say, I am a large language model. I consult a lot of different data. I can't tell you specifically. And it does kind of add this disclaimer at the beginning. And then it absolutely generates some very specific resources. So enter here my primary concerns I want to raise for this summit. So here, to generate my response, I relied on my pre-existing knowledge as an AI language model, which is based on a large corpus of text, et cetera, et cetera. I conducted a quick search on reliable sources, such as academic journals and historical archives, to verify the accuracy of information provided. Some of the sources I used to support my response include, so number one, my concerns and that I wanted to raise are one, the presence of this authoritative, indeed authorial I voice, asserting a position at the very same time as an asserted distance from direct claims and evidence, as an asserted non-positionality as a quote, AI language model. And two, my concern is not necessarily just about false or skewed historical and cultural information alone. And like I said, I think the claims it's making are overstated and probably not quite correct. But the citational claims here, firm claims of origin for ChatGPT statements. So while ChatGPT explains that its response is based on a large corpus of text from various sources, including books, articles, etc., it also generates specific sources that it says, I use to support my response. Here again, note the I voice, the claiming subject, even as it disavows a particular perspective in the first part of its response. So I decided to move on, and I won't necessarily go through all of these, but I did have a look at these sources. And we talked about earlier the way in which we'll get a list of sources, but they're not necessarily prioritized. In this case, I found that there were a lot of sources mentioned that are not real. So the abolitionist movement by Eric Foner, as far as I can tell, on library databases in Google does not exist. He did write something for a collection called The Abolitionist Movement, which was about American social movements. And then Charles Babbage and the Anti-Slavery Movement by Alan G. Bromley does not exist. Anthony Hyman's book absolutely does exist, but does not talk extensively about abolition. And the Cambridge History of Science, Volume 7, that mentions Babbage exactly one time as a kind of side statement about a group of scientists interested in political philosophy. And then we have the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise, which I kind of get the gist of how far we get with that. So I kind of decided, let's see, you also mentioned historical sources. So these are kind of not there, but what do you know that I don't know about letters and correspondence? ChatGPT then gave me, again, a really kind of thorough list, telling me where I can find this information. So, oh, you're going to find evidence for my claims, basically, those are my words, in correspondence with Thomas Clarkson, the Thomas Clarkson papers at the British Library. As well as reflections on the decline of science in England, et cetera. Again, I went through each of these, and we again have this skewed or even hallucinating kind of response. Reflections on the decline of science in England makes no mention of anything related to slavery or abolition. There is an anonymous response that mentions an emancipated person of color, and that's it. So this context that is being claimed is so significant that, in fact, I want to be significant and I want to tie in is sort of this this presentation from the language model itself and from the chatbot, not necessarily supported by what actually exists. And then the Thomas Clarkson papers at the British Library, as far as I can tell, does not exist. And I was able to go to the British Library for separate research and talk to an archivist later in the summer who said, yeah, I've never heard of that. And this is not the first time this has happened. And then I learned that they're getting lots of people were sent by ChatGPT looking for resources that do not materially exist or are just not in that collection. So there is a set of Thomas Clarkson papers at the University of Atlanta. So how it's being tied particularly to Babbage, and again, ChatGPT is asserting that there is correspondence directly between them. This would be sort of the smoking gun, sort of say, when we're looking for that kind of historical evidence. It's like when you're looking for two people standing next to each other in a photograph. It's giving me this on a platter, and it's made up. And of course, there's something going on in the statistical work underneath with all of the data that it's processing. But there's also something going on with the actual performance of the chatbot itself. That's really an issue and that I really want to talk about. And So again, I asked it about the Thomas Clarkson papers. It was giving me specific dates, talking about the discussions of political strategy and fundraising efforts, really specific. So the third part of my talk here, the unreasonable authority of AI. In short, the machine was hallucinating, I think. And I say I think because even as I reviewed this interaction before the summit, I was full of doubt because of the length of the responses, the specificity of resources, their summaries, and the confidence of the claims. So what does this mean then for the student researcher or researcher unable to verify these sources? Further, what does it mean when ChatGPT performs expertise, veracity, and authority so convincingly, even for someone conditioned to doubt it? It's performing not only as historian, but as librarian and archivist, fulfilling each of these roles I invite it to perform or ask of it through my prompts and questions. And I want to suggest here that that there's kind of a simultaneous thing happening here. That this particular kind of authority that seems to emerge comes from both a history of objectivity related to machines and quantification, as well as this particular kind of performance of the authorial I voice. So the simultaneous presence of a supposed non-position, as well as a very much claiming position. So to kind of give some context, in Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison's Objectivity, they talk about shifts in principles of objectivity in the 19th century from a truth to nature or expert scientist into a preference for technologies for mediating or conducting observations of phenomenon. And the idea is that they're absented the human consciousness that might cloud what is actually happening. And it might be free from that error. And that gained a real authority in terms of objectivity in that period that kind of persists into now. But it relies on this double bind, which is that on the one hand, it's supposed to be distanced from the observing phenomenon. It is not attached to it in any way. But at the same time, the very principle of these machines was based on a kind of indexicality or indexical touch to the phenomenon happening. So when we have, for example, Babbage's automatic writing machine that he put on trains to try and read or communicate the movement of the engine on a piece of paper, which, by the way, is what Greg Siegel traces as an early black box. When he does that, it relies on the direct touch between the phenomenon, the engine itself, and the arm of this graphic machine. In other words, if there's not an interestedness of the observing apparatus, there's certainly an involvement. What Barad might now say is kind of an interaction that they're co-constituting one another. And my suggestion is, in fact, that in the absence of this particular kind of indexical touch within an AI scenario in which data has these layers of encoding before we arrive at these claims and knowledge, we have a different kind of direct touch or affect by way of this sort of personality or humanness of the chatbot itself. And I wanted to share, I'm running out of time, so I wanted to move on to what the last part I'm calling a finely tuned personality. So AI retains the aura of the machine and quantification. The indexical relationship to material phenomena is disrupted by layers of digital data. And so what we get is this authoritative I voice that produces, again, this kind of intimacy with knowledge. And again, that authorial sense. In a yet unpublished manuscript on AI, media scholar Katja Schwartzman writes, "Who speaks when an AI model says I?" And she also asked ChatGPT its positionality, and it said, "As a computer-based AI model, I don't possess a personal identity, consciousness, or positionality. I am a tool designed to provide information," et cetera, et cetera. Schwartzman notes the dissonance of the personal pronoun I, even as ChatGPT insists on not possessing a subjective perspective. This was resonating to me with Luke Stark's keynote today in talking about this sort of animacy of the chatbot, even as it has these statistical processes going underneath. And my suggestion here is that those are really working in tandem to produce a really convincing form of authority. And so what would it mean to unpack that authority for students? One might be to even approach conversations about AI as an unreliable narrator, something that we might be familiar with in English classes. When we approach that unreliable narrator, we are now more wary about claims to fact and even further claims from that. And again, just to end, and this is a friend and a friend and colleague, Katja Schwartzman, really brilliant. I advise looking up her stuff. But one of her big points here that I'm really in agreement with is the layer in AI of fine tuning that's happening. So you have training of the model, but then there is the next layer of fine tuning, which basically is producing norms and values and language for the AI chatbot. And if we're producing or making things in terms of norms, we're creating norms for people interacting with it as well. And so there's a huge political question here about that kind of norm making and the very positionality of the machine, which itself is hidden because this is labor that we don't necessarily know how it's being decided, who's setting the kinds of values in terms of openness or helpfulness. And we have this kind of enigma underneath. So those are the main concerns I wanted to bring. And thank you for listening. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks so much. I don't know what you were nervous about. Sorry. Thank you, Carrie, for kicking this off with such an amazing session. And for everyone earlier today, my mind is on fire right now with some of the conversations that have been happening. So I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit different that I'm hoping that you'll all get involved with. It's a project I'm working on that sits right at this intersection of literacy and an openness and justice. Can I have the little clicker thing? Thank you. So it's called POEM, or Project on Open and Evolving Meta-Literacies. And I'm just really grateful to particularly James Neal at the Institute for Museum and Library Services, because he saw the value in this and supported it with a National Leadership Award for Libraries grant this year, which means I can pay people to do the work. So yes, no unrecompensed labor. Okay. So POEM is designed to be an iterative, community-reviewed, curated, and bilingual collection of flexible, open educational resources for the use of high school and college instructors and librarians to improve student and youth literacy, initially in 3 main fields: algorithm and AI literacy. And I mean that both in the critical sense, critical AI literacy, and in the sense of AI literacy that we were talking about earlier, data and computational literacy, and media and disinformation literacy. And as you can imagine, these are all very intertwined. The goal is to curate and provide access to these teaching and learning materials that can help students gain the skills, not only to understand the contemporary knowledge landscape, but to critically evaluate it, to take control of their own engagement with it, and to work within it as informed actors rather than passive consumers, right? To get past that I that Carrie was just talking about. I just wanted to do a quick check. How many people in the room do not know what an open educational resource is? All right, we're at Rutgers and we've got lots of librarians. Okay, I don't need to go into this in depth. The idea, so this will be an OER, open educational resource, and the aim is that anyone can take any of the resources that are curated by this collection and use them or build on them or update them or publish them in a collection, right? And those resources can be anything from an assignment or a rubric or a syllabus or a video or an executable notebook or a podcast, right? So we're trying to think really broadly about different modalities here. And my next question is, why do we need this? But I'm maybe preaching to the choir. So it's no secret that this widespread implementation of automated decision-making has been sort of compounding social and financial inequities and exacerbating social decisions, right? To paraphrase William Gibson, the sci-fi writer, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And so we have these ubiquitous, sort of smooth, proprietary user interfaces that obfuscate computational processes and present auto-magical results, right? And at the same time, we're being barraged with this presentation of faster and cheaper and easier to make falsified media content, misleading data visualizations, and selective and biased data that's presented with authority as truth. And what we're seeing is people not only used by, but shaped by algorithms as well, right? They're mediating and determining the types of information people see, the kinds of ideas they're interacting with, and the communities they belong to online. I have a 15-year-old who so far has not been allowed to have the internet on their phone. And they asked me, can I have it? And I was like, yes, but only if you read The Anxious Generation first. And I don't know if any of you have read that. It's Jonathan Haidt's How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. It's phenomenal, but it goes in great detail about just how deliberate the feeding of information to children and teenagers is. So when access to information is being restricted, not only by paywalls, but by previous interactions and likes and purchases and browsing habits, and when we're trained to favor the ease of the river, the stream, over the exploration and the adventure of the garden, right? We are steadily losing agency over the inputs that shape our understanding of the world. So in this environment, the importance of literacy and fluency or competency goes beyond information literacy to encompass a wide range of digital fluencies, particularly those pertaining to computation and data and mis and disinformation. And, you know, we've watched over the last couple of years as that information ecosystem has been continually and completely disrupted by this mass availability of generative AI tools. Some of them are scarier than others. I don't know if any of you remember the announcement and then sort of retraction of Sora AI, which was going to create sort of these instantly created videos, right? To give ordinary people instant access to what the New York Times described as the ability to create talking puppets, and the Guardian described as mis or disinformation on steroids. You know, an AI-generated Taylor Swift, I believe, endorsed a certain presidential candidate just the other day, and then we saw an actual Taylor Swift say something very different. And, you know, this mis and disinformation issue is so relevant this year. Okay, so some of you might have noticed that here in the US, we're in an election year. Okay, but we're not the only ones, right? There have been presidential or parliamentary elections this year in South Africa, Iran, the UK, France, Algeria, Botswana, Ghana, Mauritius, Mozambique, Rwanda, Tunisia, Venezuela, and Uruguay. That's just some. There are more. So as communication scholar Michelle Amazine said in a 2024 report on media literacy education, just when we need trusted information more than ever, our media ecosystem is poised for a tsunami of deliberately false content intended to mislead and supercharged by the use of generative artificial intelligence. It's not even new. As early as 2017, David Lanks, who's professor of librarianship at the University of Texas, said that unless there's an increased effort to make true information literacy a part of basic education, there'll be a class of people who can use algorithms and a class who are used by them. And those who are used by them are being used by what Arshina Deeb-Mokadam calls data polluted by a set of myths from the age of the Enlightenment, right? So these are increasing the gaps between who can work with data and who can't, and those who scrape and harvest and collect and describe it in the name of capital. And it makes data literacy education into what Evan Shapiro has called a matter of survival. There was a survey in 2023 that he did that said that 2/3 of the 45,000 US adults surveyed don't understand how their data is being used. And so he's making this argument that being literate about how it's being gathered, used, and abused is absolutely crucial, right? Author of Data Feminism, Catherine D'Ignacio, goes one step further, equating data literacy not just with survival, but after Paulo Freire, with emancipation.
Obama, too.
So, setting the scene. There's a little bit of an urgency here, right? And yet, school librarians, who are often the people who are equipped and trained and expected to teach meta literacies in the high school classroom and on college campuses too, are increasingly deemed an unaffordable luxury, particularly in cash-strapped public education systems. Right? There was a 21 report that said that almost 3.1 million students in predominantly Hispanic districts and about 4.8 million students in predominantly non-white districts did not have a school librarian. The numbers dipped about 5% during the pandemic. They haven't risen since. And then we're reading reports about classroom teachers feeling undertrained, unequipped, or otherwise unable to create lessons in this environment, right? And not even understanding themselves where to start. And as we've all been talking about today, so in the universities, we're not even really sure where we should be going. And librarians often don't get to teach for credit courses. And so literacy sessions end up being these sort of one-shot efforts in an English class, right? Where you're sort of maybe already teaching to the choir. So is planned to be an intervention. This is going to be a robust platform that supports the development of these critical skills in algorithmic thinking, data analysis, media literacy, and digital citizenship. It's going to be divided, as I said, into these 3 sections, right? And under each of those, there's 2 co-editor librarians who are going to write an introductory essay to that literacy area and then organize the area into 10 topics or keywords. This is a structure, I don't know, I know we've got some digital pedagogy fans. Any of you that know digital pedagogy in the humanities, the volume that was put up by the Modern Language Association, the sort of structure of this is very much influenced by that. It's definitely worth a look. And then so there's going to be 6 co-editors. We put out the call. We're currently going through all of the other applications for the co-editors. Then there'll be 30 keyword editors, right? And so people are going to propose a keyword that they think goes with AI literacy or goes with data literacy. And then each of those keywords is going to, each of those keyword or curators or editors is going to have to go out and find 10 teaching and learning objects for the keyword, right? Ensuring that those objects represent a diverse range of perspectives and voices and learning modalities and methods. And then they'll all be tagged and sort of tagged with education level and learning objective and modality and all sorts of things like that. I think I might need to skip this next picture a bit. I was going to talk really briefly about the process of creating poem because, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about design justice, and this is a process that is being definitely informed by the principles of design justice. It's iterative, it's reflective, it's community-led, and the entire editorial and curatorial teams, in addition to their colleagues and students, right, are going to have intentional opportunities to engage with this and shape the web interface, the creation of the tagging and filtering systems, and other elements of the UX and UI. And there are all these moments for community review in here as well. We are going to have a team of paid translators who are going to be working on teaching, on translating the interface and the learning objects themselves into or from English and Spanish. So we're starting with English and Spanish, Spanish being the second most spoken language in the US. Making sure that we're engaging with accessibility experts. There's also money in the budget for this. I'm so glad we got the grant because all these people can be paid, like I say. This is going to be iterative and reflective, and it may and probably will change. And honestly, it already has. And I've only had the grant for a month, right? So I presented the project before I even knew if it was going to be funded at the Design Justice Institute in South Africa this summer. And I've been thinking that the co-editors would decide on the keywords and then put out a call for curators. And one of the participants was like, well, no, that's not a community-led. You need to put out the call for people to propose the keywords they think are important, right? And democratize and broaden the ownership of this. And I was like, duh, of course, right? Yes. So, and we've all, like the CMU co-editors met yesterday just to begin to review some of the applications for those other 3 co-editor positions. And they're from such a wide and diverse range of backgrounds that we've already, and with such expertise, we've already started making a list being like, hey, what do you think the most important keyword in this area is? And do you want to edit it? Like, we've already got such a rich number of folks who are interested in being involved with this. Even the tech stack has changed, right? We were thinking about doing it like the MLA's digital pedagogy did, using a sort of complex WordPress setup. WordPress hurts my previous digital humanities heart. I don't love it. They provided us with a really good list of reasons why we might not want to. So now we're looking at adapting and adding to some scholar-owned tech in the form of collection builder, right? And to like trying to build on some of these. I just want to give you a few examples of what this could look like. So this is I can look up there. Okay. This is an example of potential keywords, right? That people might propose for, say, algorithm and AI literacy. And so we might zoom in on one of those keywords, and then we can imagine a set of potential teaching and learning objects that cover aspects of that keyword. These may not yet have been created, or they may already exist, right? I've heard some really interesting projects here today. Or they might exist, but they're on someone's hard drive or in their syllabus, right? So the idea is to sort of bring them together as this findable, accessible collection that is reusable that people can involve with. So here is what, so say if we went back here, we're like, okay, one of the keywords is data sovereignty. This is sort of what we're imagining a data sovereignty keyword might look like. There's an introduction, there's a set of learning materials next to it, and then you can dig into one of those learning materials. This is the Maori data governance model, and you can learn more about it. Okay, so I'm going to just conclude with a little bit of a pitch. The call for curators is going to go out later this year to community college, public, high school librarians, and teachers. And we want as much involvement as we can possibly get. We want to make sure that the perspectives and voices and examples are as diverse as the intended audience here. And this approach is really sort of central in ensuring that the target audience, right, the high school, community college, and college librarians and educators are seeing themselves and their students, not only in the exercises and examples, but in the roster of authors and editors who have shaped the work, right? So they're not just like coming to the party, they have a seat at the table. Because of its status as an OER, while this is going to be available in English and Spanish, it can be translated and adapted into other languages and cultures, enriched with other examples, and enhanced and updated through integration with other open materials. And so I hope you're all going to be willing to boost the signal, recommend resources, or join the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Let's see, we're going to move on to. So, Amal, if you, this is Francesca, I'm gonna stay at the podium. If you just want to say slide when you want me to advance, I will do so.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much. I am so inspired by my colleagues here, and sign me up, please, for that project that just, I love the idea and the participatory nature of it, and just everything about the design justice framework I love. So thank you so much for the work that you're both doing. And I'm truly inspired by both of you. Today, I'm going to be presenting to you about a project that I'm working on at the Rios Lab, which is based at Seton Hall university in New Jersey, in South Orange, New Jersey. I wear a lot of hats and I do a lot of things, but currently I'm the president-elect of the National Association for Social Workers in the New Jersey chapter. I also teach at Rutgers as a lecturer at the School of Social Work. I'm no longer at the Council on Social Work Education, so my bio is a little outdated, but I am so thrilled to work on research at the Rios Lab and to also include our students in that process and give them real world experience with the entire research cycle. So data collection, mentoring them throughout that process and having them participate in our publications. So slide. My research partner is Dr. Juan Rios. He is the co-PI on the lab at the Rios Lab, which stands for Reflexive, Innovative, Objective Social Justice Research. And we do a lot of community engaged work in Newark, New Jersey with inner city youth. Next slide. Two of the theories that underpin our projects include positive selves theory, which is Neurius and Marcus and Neurius from 1984. It's a theory that underpins the work that we do. So essentially what we're trying to do with the AI and expressive arts is helps the young youth get in touch with their post-trauma identity and to be able to visualize themselves in the future, their future sense of self. So we've worked with justice impacted youth who have experienced trauma between the ages of 16 and 26 years old in Newark, New Jersey. The second theory that underpins our work is collective efficacy. So we begin our work with our youth using healing circles where we help them talk about and access some of the harmful things that have happened to them in trauma. And two clinicians, both of us practicing, Dr. Rios and I, are there to moderate that whole process and to help them unpack some of the processing of the trauma. And so the idea behind the AI is to help them begin to visualize some of their post-trauma identity using the artwork that they generate using the prompt engineering. And so we are using the theory to help guide us in that process and to help them really get in touch with what their future can look like and to become very speculative about that future, which has a lot of motivational features in it. And so we are really working to transform their and motivate the youth to use these skills and to begin to see themselves in a positive light. Next slide. So that is our theoretical orientation. And we use a core mechanism for our intervention that lies in the combination of our AI augmented art and the expressive components that are designed to promote trauma healing. So the AI provide individualized support for the youth. It helps them begin to create some visual representations for their post-trauma identity. The expressive arts component allows the participant to process their experience in a non-threatening way. So it provides that medium for them to feel more comfortable and to talk about the harms that have been done through them in a creative way through art. And so they begin to explore and express their emotions, begin to talk about things that are very difficult for them to articulate verbally. And that process then facilitates trauma recovery and it provides them with a safe space for them and an outlet for expression. Then we take them into groups and then they begin to talk about their artifacts that they create together in our lab. And they begin to work with those tangible visualizations to help them really actualize towards their future sense of self. The use of the AI in that context helps them access their personalization of that, and it helps them engage with some of the painful emotions that they've had and begin to share it with other people, which has a lot of social benefits to it. Next slide. The rationale for this intervention is really to use AI as a means for people to access parts of their future that they cannot immediately see. And it's rooted in that ability to be able to take that in a non-threatening way and begin to share that with others who share that space with them at the Trauma Healing Center. We also recognize that traditional therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy and traditional talk therapies might not be always accessible for everyone, and it may not be effective for some of the traumas that these individuals have experienced, particularly those who have challenges with verbalizing their trauma. And so by engaging them in that non-threatening way where they're able to visualize and express more about what happened to them can help them bypass some of those challenges and become more expressive about their emotions, about their human experience. And that helps us provide an alternative pathway to healing when we focus on that creation aspect and the expression rather than focusing on verbal recounting of traumatic events, which can be re-traumatizing. So when we integrate the AI, it further allows for a more personalized experience for the youth. They begin to talk about things like their interest in social entrepreneurship. Some of them talked about t-shirt businesses or sneaker businesses that they wanted to start. And this ability to translate that into a visual image and how they might use these things to market their idea was truly transformative for them. And they began to connect to this idea in a really nice way. The next slide. So like I said earlier, part of the intervention is a healing circle where we begin to do a lot of processing of the emotions that have happened to individuals. The healing circles are small supportive group settings where we're able to unpack some of the shared experience in the group. And it creates a safe place for them where they feel encouraged, empowered, and really a safe space for them to explore what their future might look like. The healing circle also provides a communal space for collective healing to happen when one person hears something similar to what happened to them. It makes them feel less alone and more connected to the rest of the humans in the room. And then participants benefit from that creative process and they begin to witness their healing journey together with the rest of the group. Next slide. So the two platforms that we used for this augmenting the images and developing new images, co-creating that with the youth in the circle were Midjourney and Crayon. And so we would walk them through how to develop a prompt engineer that can develop a photo and for them to be able to see that and to translate that into how that can promote their future success. And so a lot of the themes that came up for the youth was this entrepreneurial mindset and this almost like really strong affinity for financial freedom and success. And so a lot of the participants talked about what does success look to them. It was about their finances and being able to be financially empowered. And so we worked with them around those themes to develop images and to create some ways that they can become financially stable on their own. We also teach them these skills so that they have a toolkit of skills that they can translate into their workplace and in the fields that they aspire to go to. So that helps us really develop them and broaden their aspirations as well as support them in their future endeavors. And then the next slide. So some of the techniques that we used are very reflexive in nature. These techniques help the individual distribute some of the emotional distress and stress that they have had through trauma, and they begin to transfer some that stress and that overload onto an actual visual. And so those reflexive techniques are particularly valuable in environments where access to supportive spaces might be very limited. So we asked them to reflect on what they would do if they had no limits and they wanted to redecorate the trauma healing center that they attend to together. A lot of them raised issues about having an indoor swimming pool. That would be very important to them. And if they had unlimited resources, that was the first thing that they would add to the space, and it would bring them joy. So they also were talking about a lot of the sports that they were interested in, especially a lot of the male participants wanted to see football fields and other kinds of activities in their space. So we helped them reflect on that and develop different images. These are a few samples of the images that were developed in community together. And it helps them transfer some of their ideas into a tangible visual image. The stress distribution, this helps them remain stable in the present moment. It helps ground them, and it helps them really develop new ideas about what their future can look like and how they might get there. And then lastly, we did a lot of reflection in our healing circles for them to reflect on what they created, how it made them feel. And we did a lot of body scans to help them, process some of the emotions and sensations that were happening within their body in terms of that load transfer process. And then the next slide is my final slide. So let's work together. If any of this sounds interesting to you or you want to learn more, feel free to contact me. My email is there and Dr. Rios is there as well. And this is a photo of the actual trauma center that we were working at over the summer. So thank you so much for your attention and thank you for the opportunity, Francesca.
Thank you. So at this point, we can open things up for Q&A. Well, let's see. I guess as usual, I have to catch up on the online audience here. So just making sure. Yeah, some great comments in the chat about. What's wrong?
Sorry, I'm reading the breaking news.
Oh. OpenAI releases a new series of reasoning models for.
But just cares. Raise money, right? Yeah. $60 billion valuation. This is not the moment to believe anything they say.
All right, so thank you, online audience. And if anybody has any questions, I know we have a couple lingering from the morning. I left them open just because I knew that they would come back in terms of their relevance and subject matter. But feel free to enter questions in the chat or the Q&A, and then the live audience is obviously welcome to ask questions as well.
I'll ask a question. Is there one on there? Those are from this morning. I think everybody is just blown away by the amazable panel. Really, really wonderful work. So this is actually a question for Carrie, and it goes back to Luke a little bit, because I think that there's some real overlap. And I wonder, so it seems to me that there's a kind of an ontological question at stake, right? Like, what is a chatbot when it is personifying itself, right? And it seems to me that both of you are very aware that there is one part of the answer to that question that is heavily designed. And that comes directly from OpenAI's team that chose to implement ChatGPT as a chatbot at a time when actually chatbots were considered this is a shout out to my colleague Matthew Stone, who's not here. He is the lead author of a paper about this that is coming out in Critical AI's next issue, which, by the way, should be out tomorrow. So the story that he tells in that paper is that for a long time, certainly after, certainly Weizenbaum, through the 90s, even during Siri period, when Siri is deliberately implemented in a way that is not trying to make you, it's not easy to figure out that Siri is searching the web. Even though there are like a few cutesy type things that it makes. So OpenAI actually breaks with what is considered best practice in order to fine-tune GPT-3 on human-like conversation, uses scripts that is our wine.
Oh,
I
hurry.
need,
Somebody.
are they out there? Okay, this is very important breaking news. There's wine.
We're gonna need a drink soon. So anyways, so OpenAI makes that decision, fine tunes on conversation and decides to implement in that I form using reinforcement learning, these are human generated scripts that are reinforced through humans and then done in an automated fashion to back that up. So that is 100% designed by OpenAI because, and I said this morning, so our papers dovetailed, they recognize it's misaligned. And they don't see the use of a chatbot that says I as a problem. They see that as alignment because that's not what the Yang paper discusses. They're only talking about reinforcement learning through human feedback. And it's quite an interesting paper, but they're not talking about chatbotization, which is yet another thing in the pipeline that is happening. So bottom line, what I want to know is if you feel that it makes sense to make a distinction between the kind of distributed human personality that you get from modeling as much of the textual data on the internet, probabilistically, the so-called stochastic parrot, which certainly is telling you something about something, right? I mean, there are all kinds of interesting observations that we could make about that. And then something that is a lot more transparent and less mysterious, which is the absolute explicit determination to, while getting rid of some bad content that is in that system, to implement it as a chatbot, and as a chatbot that calls itself I. It doesn't actually, it could say, this system has not been trained in a way that answers that question reliably, right? Which would be a whole different kind of thing. And I so now over to you on that, Carrie.
Can you repeat this, a specific question if there was?
Yeah, I'm
I'm in
sorry that I
agreement
wasn't
with-
clear enough. No, I rambled a bit.
Yeah.
So, does that matter to you? In other words, when you're talking about it, I mean, in a way, Luke was talking about it in a more explicitly ontological way, but you are too, because you're talking about the unreasonable, and I love your paper title, by the way, right? The unreasonable authority of generative AI, or however you put it. Some of what's unreasonable is coming from the scale, which is what has been talked about since the unreasonable effectiveness of data, right? But some of that unreasonableness is coming from, let's implement it this way.
Yes. I really agree. I do think there is a distinction. And as Luke had said, and also Katya in her article kind of points out, is it very easily could have been this AI system, this artificial intelligence system is not able to the first person is a deliberate choice. And not just the first person, but the training of the model to reach a goal and meet an objective. So talk by Dr. Stuart Russell, where he talks about AI really being oriented towards meeting a need or a goal, and it's going to try and do that, even if it's incorrect. That's what it's being trained more on the valuation of basically having a solution. And so you have, like in this one, the chatbot sort of providing solutions that are not really that, but rhetorically present themselves so. And so I think that aspect of the kind of rhetoric is absolutely important. And I also do think that is when we talk about you know, justice in terms of design, a key place is to look really, I think, in that fine-tuning process. And especially where you have like industries hiring philosophers, like who are the philosophers?
Philosophers and not those.
Right. Like where, we know like that those backgrounds, the disciplines, that matters for even your perspective philosophically in that discipline. And so I'm really curious about, I don't think transparency is just the answer. Like we all are just like, just show us, be transparent. It is a step, but something about like, in a way, removing that sort of human eye a little bit, or even I wonder of like entering this kind of variation, like, well, I'm trained with 2 possible responses for this, or ways of thinking about this that highlight I'm thinking on the fly here though, but highlight the constructedness of the chatbot itself, its active work in training and responding based on prompts. So even getting a hint of like not a decision tree per se, but that there is this probabilistic reasoning going on underneath, seems like it could be kind of important for, interacting with it and not being, put in a direction that's getting a not real resource somewhere.
What's fascinating to me is that it's yes, we need this sort of like the blue sky thinking talk from earlier. Like we need that
Yeah.
sort of like that approach that reveals the probabilistic. But at the same time, there's also this other incredibly gendered performative layer of expertise
Yes.
that just ChatGPT is like that dude in my comp lit grad class who would just like
That's such a good point, because I would never speak like how ChatGPT is speaking. Like it train off of me, or don't.
but this
But-
is sort of like
but yeah.
it's so clear who's programming this.
Who's tuning? Yes.
See, and we talk up in my school about this, whose language is like this ChatGPT's language, right? How did it get to be the way it is?
And that's what's so disturbing when you start to think about the norming.
Sorry. And then it's also running these statistical models fundamentally off of language as its data set. So it's working off semantic data. So the way in which language operates, that it's constructed, that it's culturally contingent, is so important to talking about and analyzing these systems. And that gets recursively like replayed into just interacting with the bot itself.
This is the disembodied voice of Mary Tun. Thank you all so much for such a vibrant panel. I did have a very short, quick question for Dr. Hussein, but I'm not sure if she's still there. Dr. Hussein, are you able to chime back in? And if not, I'm going to pass the microphone and hold off my question.
Yeah, I bet she'll come back. Okay. Could we have some help? We should have an IT person here.
I can jump on.
Bye, Mary.
Yep.
Thank you.
As someone who does hybrid workshops regularly, this is all.
Thank you, because I'm a hybrid loser.
Hello, I am Jose, PhD, second year PhD student at LIS at Rutgers. So I have one question to Dr. Agate and also one question to Dr. Hussein, but she's not here, so I will ask one question, maybe 2 questions. So I'm currently participating in a research project focusing on federal and state health data dashboard. As a result, I had spent the entire summer coding the hundreds of health data dashboard. Through this, I realized that dashboard designs vary greatly. Every state has different design, especially the interactive features. Users' level of engagement can be categorized in various ways, from participating survey to shared ownership. So I hear you have certain model of governance and engagement strategy, but can you tell me more about strategy for public engagement that your project is utilizing?
Sure. Yeah, but thank you for that question. So there is always a danger when you're trying to make something as inclusive as possible that you go too far and then you never get the project done, right? So I'm trying to be really careful, and I'm saying, okay, the way this was written, it's written as a resource for 9 to 12 and undergraduate teachers and librarians to use with their students, right? So what we need to make sure, and that's why there's such a broad, like with sort of an editorial team of 36, the idea is that when we get to the peer review stages, not only off the platform, and I'm not talking about the final platform, but like the prototypes of the platform and the individual sort of objects themselves, that we are able to tap into the network that 36 people should be able to provide us, to have them test with their students, test with colleagues, all the rest of it, so that it really is trying to make sure that the folks that would be maybe using or learning from these resources, like it makes sense for them, the interface makes sense for them. And so we have these built-in sort of steps. There's a long sort of project plan where there are sort of review weeks, community review weeks, where we'll try and do as much in person as we can, but also just engaging on Zoom, whatever way we can get maximal participation, and then take that feedback back into sort of this iterative process. The other thing we're trying to do is release in batches. So that, because, you know, if I just waited 2 years and then released all of these resources, half of them might be out of date. Never mind anything else. And so trying to do this sort of iterative release so that if there are keywords that we've missed out or become really important, or someone's like, I didn't know about this project, but I actually have something to add, and it's that those can be brought in. Does that answer your question in a way? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Jamie Petruska from the History Department. Fantastic panel. Thanks to all the panelists. Carrie, I mean, your talk just beautifully illustrated, I think, why the historians I know want nothing to do with ChatGPT, with AI, both for their own research and in teaching undergraduate students. I mean, everything there from, you know, the sort of authoritative yet overly general response from ChatGPT, the falsified citations, people showing up at the British Library in search of archival collections that don't exist. I mean, that just really sort of crystallizes historians' real. It's more than reluctance, really, just like strong aversion to this technology. And I mean, many colleagues I know have started sort of curating sources that they want students to work with, rather than have them go through the process of researching themselves in primary sources. I sometimes give students photographs I've taken from the archives, and I say, only you and I have ever looked at this document. That's not really practical, though. And I wondered just if you could speculate, is there a sort of middle way between the kind of, what you experienced and walked us through here, and this approach to, curating the sources, providing sources for them? I understand why my colleagues do that. I know why I gave, sources that only I had ever seen, but something is lost, I think, when students at the undergraduate level don't have the opportunity to do primary source research, to read sideways in newspapers, and so to sort of handle some of these academic integrity issues that come with ChatGPT. I worry that something's being lost in the way that we teach undergraduate history research, or anyone who's working with historical sources in any discipline. And I don't know the answer, and I'm just wondering if you might speculate.
Sure. I think I can, or I will. Yeah, I totally hear you on all of those things about historical research. Something I was thinking about as we were talking is there was a funny motivation I felt as I went through each of these sources and verified them. And it's almost like this gamification thing where I'm like, is that real? Like I'm gonna prove you wrong. And there's a way I could see a kind of motivation in that, or even a classroom game in some sense, wherein it's actually challenging it, understanding the machine itself as propositional. It is proposing and making claims. It is not giving a definitive fact. I kind of had in my mind, and this feels very businessy, which is annoying, the 3 Ps of it being like propositional, performative, and probabilistic, fundamentally based on probability, and that these layers are working in tandem. But part of the importance to me of that propositional thing is to really, it is not the end point, and even as a start point is contestable, and it should, if anything, challenge you to go do a set, like a process of verification. But the other thing I wanted to add is I think something that was really helpful to me has been some courses instruction I've had on silence histories, absent histories, post-colonial research, the archives of slavery, and the Atlantic. Those spaces, and particularly with Black scholars and scholars of color who are working through these methodologies, are already contending with the existence or lack of existence of written accounts, of visual accounts, and are working with archives that are themselves often in material in different ways, maybe performative or spoken. And that kind of learning, and actually teaching some of that to my students in my course, I think has helped cultivated a sense of skepticism around claims, sort of these authoritative claims themselves around the archive. So, part of my whole suspicion with this was already like, where are you getting all of this material about the history of slavery and Babbage? There's already a whole field that talks about the problem of recovery and the question of recovery and in these spaces. And so anyway, I think there's just something in that. I taught a class called Haunted Matter, and we did ghost stories, but use the ghost as a way of thinking through the absent or silence or haunting histories. And I think about that a lot, and that framework of haunting when dealing with this kind of material as well. And teaching that through those other contexts, I think could provide some groundwork for being skeptical of these things, but maybe also therefore being a challenge towards where can we find these conversations or histories or what have you. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it. But.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sorry. No.
You have to turn it off.
That would help. I just wanted to say quickly just one thing. So I have a colleague at Western, Bill Turkle, who's an MIT grad, and he teaches digital humanities, who is very enthusiastic, and he's a historian, and he is very enthusiastic about using generative AI in historical research practices. But I think my sense is that, he's a digital humanities person. He knows how to code. He knows what he's doing. And I also think that there's a certain amount of like individualized N of one tinkering and setting up the system and having a kind of, an apparatus of this searches this and this searches this, and then that feeds into this, which, we all do to varying degrees in various mediums as scholars. And I just don't know if that's going to translate to the mass kind of things we've been talking about today, right? So I think if there is a utility to it, I guess maybe just to time into this question, it might be very much like, the quantified self movement 10 years ago, where where, you have people who were very happy with their like obsessive logging of spreadsheets and weird visualizations. And I was like very skeptical of this back at the time. And now I'm like, well, those people are charming. This is like a very individualized form of subjectivity. What's not charming is, your health app, kind of standardizing the data collection and then selling the data to somebody else. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think there might be a little bit, but it might not matter that much in some way.
Yeah, I went to grad school with Bill, and he was always coding.
Need to use the mic.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, then you know. So there you go. Yeah.
If I can jump in with a question that builds off of the conversation about process. Hi, this is Mary Tun. I may be off camera. I'm lurking in the background, but very enthusiastically engaged. Oh, there I am. Hi. The question is for Dr. Hussein. I was curious to hear a little bit more about how you are facilitating the prompt design process. So could you walk us through an example activity that you do with participants at the hub?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. So we begin with them to develop their visualization using a prompt. We ask them to develop keywords, and we may give them, for example, where would you like to see yourself in 2 years from now? Or another one that we do is how would you define success? What does success look like for you? And then we begin to walk them through keywords that might go with that. So they give us the keywords, and then we help them type that into the platform, the AI platform, and then it generates based on the keywords that they have developed. So we will give them a specific prompt, and then we walk them through the prompt engineering using the different keywords that they come up with, and then they see the visualization. Once the visualization is there, they select the ones that they like. We help them play with different filters that they can use within like Midjourney, for example, to get it to aesthetically pleasing to their liking. And then they have that piece of art that they can download, export into like a PDF, and then they talk about that in collective group through a healing circle. So that is kind of how we approach that process.
Yeah, I have a related question to Dr. Hussein. I'm a member of a social worker in New Jersey chapter. It's really great to see you here.
Nice. Welcome.
As a licensed social worker, what do you think are the ethical issue we need to consider when AI is utilized in social work practice? And another question, based on your experience, what kind of critical literacy or critical AI literacy education should social workers or social work students receive in their professional training as AI continues to expand in social work field? Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such an important question, and I think that it's super important. So the platforms that we're using, we use licensed versions, not the free version. So that helps protect confidentiality with any images that the youth may upload. So for example, if they chose to upload a photo of themselves and augment it to a future time, to protect that, we upload it in a licensed version of that. Now, moving to the question about social work practice and the ethical dilemma of using AI in those kinds of technologies, I am very cautious about, confidentiality and honoring that confidentiality of our clients. So I don't think it's appropriate to use things like ChatGPT or those kinds of emergent technologies to chart, for example. I think that opens up a lot of privacy and harm that could happen to the clients and their identities. So I caution us from using it in that respect. What I think it's appropriate for is simulations. For example, if I were to use a vignette and I'm trying to train a clinical practice course on how they might approach a social skills group, we may use the technology to help us develop different kinds of ways to do an assessment, different role plays that we might consider to help train in a clinical setting. But I would caution us from using real protected health information in these platforms. So that's what my thoughts are on that. And thank you so much for the question.
Yeah, it should be out.
Okay, thank you again so much. I just want to echo that this has been just a great day and a great panel. My question is also for Dr. Hussein. I'm trying to think about where to begin. I really, really admire the idea of taking a practical theory and seeing how AI can maybe be applied to it. One thing that I've learned is that the way that a lot of the models have been trained, especially on images, is that there is a dearth of imagery on the internet of women, of people of color, of people of size. And so I'm wondering when you're having your clients do these like future thinking, it sounds like sometimes they're entering in a picture of themselves and that's being augmented. But have there been moments where they want to envision something, but they're not seeing themselves reflected? Or have you encountered any issues of bias in any of these types of exercises? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the question. And yes, we did in fact, over the summer this year, there was an issue where one of the students was trying to develop an image without uploading a photo. So she wanted to develop an image for like a t-shirt. And the ones that were coming up with the keywords that she used were not portraying an African-American female. And so she kept, we kept on changing the keywords that she was using, but it was developing more of a white portrayal of a woman, a female. And so she said, no, but I want it to have like an afro. I want it to be big. I want the hair to be very curly. And so we kept on working with but we did see something just like that. And so it is a limitation of the technology. And so we had to work with her and develop different ways to work around that. But yes, the standards of beauty, the different sizes, different identities don't initially come up if you use general keywords, but once you adapt those and put in more specificity, they can change the images that are coming up. And then we were able to get something closer to what she was looking for by the end of that exercise.
We have a question from Marie Becker in the chat, and I'm not sure because I had to run out to meet a delivery. Marie, was your question addressed, or should we talk about that now?
I think it's a good question.
Yeah, she may not be here actually. So anyway, Marie says the expertise also feels very classist. Who is privileged to be allowed to question the results? How to build confidence and empowerment for students, especially ones who come from particularly strict authoritarian school settings, as happens in many charter schools in my area, for instance. So I would just open that up to our panelists, but also the floor if anybody has a comment.
Classist, is that talking about the voice of ChatGPT?
So I think that was coming, when you were talking about the authoritative.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you can hear me.
The ability to, like, as you did, to say, like, well, wait a
Right,
second.
this is so Mary, I've been doing this with my students. I make them experts on something. So the very first thing we do is we become experts on X, and then we use X to question the bot over and over and over. So something as simple as a rather complex reading, for instance, they become experts on the reading, like they understand it upside down and etc. And then we use that reading over and over to like test the bot. And so they know the reading rather well, and then they can see how all the limitations on the figures. So that would be an easy way to, to do it, is to just
have them be, use their own expertise on something or make them experts, over a couple of classes or so. That could be an option.
I feel like this is also, I guess, kind of what I was thinking about in that gamey way of seeing it as a challenge. Just as someone who's prone to a lot of self-doubt, again, like I said, when I would read these responses, even the second time, I was like, I must overlook something. That must exist somewhere. Like it's so sure, and it keeps naming them, and I like did the search again and really had to like reoccupy this mentality of like, now hold on, like I actually know a lot about this and I've done a lot of research, and I haven't done a lifetime of research, but I've done enough to maybe say something. So like trying to use it as a challenge to enter into that position and challenge the claim could be one mode, but it's totally enacting, trying to challenge this particular kind of voice that you probably encounter in life anyway. So I do want to echo or say like that issue of it being classist and also authoritative in a way which is difficult for students who maybe come from context where it's a lot harder to push against that, or that itself is kind of a like disciplines and comports response automatically, unthinkingly. That's an issue, and we can get into the whole disciplinary aspect too. I also really love Kim Bentley, your suggestions.
Is this on? Is this working? This is Jane Rosenzweig. I just wanted to add that I think this goes back to the critical AI literacy piece, that students really need to be learning how these systems work so that they feel empowered about this. They're being told all the time, oh, it's just a tool and how you use it is what matters, but they don't really know unless we make room in the curriculum at every level to teach them. And I think this is going to be a really big problem in K through 12 as chatbots are rolled out by Conmigo and other companies in authoritative positions, right? So they're told the Conmigo math tutor is going to teach you math, but then over here, we also really need to be explaining to them that these are not authoritative figures in the way that Mr. Conmigo is. So this is something I worry a lot about, but I think it comes back to just this same, how are we teaching not just college students, but K through 12 students, how this technology works, what it does. And of course that comes back to teachers. And, I think I'm a one-woman person calling my son's school district constantly. I would like to tell you things about chatbots. I tell them they don't, but I think there has to be some kind of, way that isn't the way that's happening right now to roll out training.
Definitely. Well, and this is just a fun fact.
The New York Times columnist Jessica Gross cited a Pew Research Foundation study that found that the percentage of K through 12 teachers who think that chatbots are more beneficial than harmful, 6%. So 94% think they are harmful to critical thinking, et cetera. And another study came out that showed that the teaching of math with either a tutor style bot or just ChatGPT getting the answer for you, compared to students that had no access to a device, the students that had no access to either thing learned better the following week than those who had either the tutor style bot or obviously getting the answer from ChatGPT, who just, were following, what you take that thing away.
Sorry, this is very brief, but my younger cousin, Alex, she told me one time she was babysitting for a long time to make money, and it absolutely blew her mind. She was babysitting this young girl who was just doing her homework, kicking her legs and going, Siri, what's 5 times 4? Or just whatever the question. And of course, it's going to give you a great answer. It's going to give you the answer. And I was like, there's something she's learned here. And she's learned how to like game a system in a kind of way, but she's not doing the learning that we want her to do. And so there's learning happening. It's not the kind of learning that we want by any means. We're training them to be like really good at working with AI, thinking in bureaucratic systems and systems of capital.
Only meaning of show your work.
Yeah, yeah. But she was just like, that's so smart somehow and also awful at the same time.
Get her a calculator.
I know. Siri, what's
Equally important is not like, oh, I know.
Really important though, it's not what we want, it's what they want. They just, we talk to them and explain what's at stake, they're not dumb. They understand that they need to use their brains, that maybe the internet won't be around one day for whatever reason, so like if we explain why it's important to learn 5+4, a lot of, I'm not saying all of them, but there will be a lot of them that will say, yes, I understand. And I'm going to try, it's the harder path, but I'm going to take the harder path.
That makes me really want to echo what we were talking about earlier about really emphasizing in pedagogy room for risk and failure. As someone who was traumatized with a small t, very small t, by a really perfectionistic system, I've been trying with my students to really try and reward engagement, not output per se, or correctness. And you don't always get the best thing at the end, but you get students who are trying things. How can you give space for people to be experimental and not feel they're being punished, as all of these numbers and values, again, also data, follow you across your lifetime into your next position, into your job applications, et cetera. I think especially at somewhere like Penn, students are so anxious about career from the get, and it inhibits learning. And so I can totally understand the reason you might turn to an AI mechanism. I'm kind of preaching here, but there's this moment where like Babbage talks about the minute he thought about computation, he was hand computing mathematical tables. And to do big math problems, this is what you do. You'd have to consult a mathematical table of logarithms that were manually calculated. And they also had a lot of errors, and you had to note the errors and pass it on. And, he was just losing his mind, getting bored. He's like, I wish I had a machine that could do this. And so fundamentally, the point was to do calculations in a really small space of time, really fast, so that you could solve problems that otherwise might exceed the possibility of a human lifetime, and have some kind of efficiency around it so you can think about the larger problem rather than doing all these little logarithms. And that's what I like to keep in mind if I'm teaching about AI or telling people about AI. It's like its job is to do math really, really, really fast and to arrive at a solution. The rest is like added on stuff, but in a very base way. I mean, maybe I'm being incorrect there, but like it's a helpful framing for understanding or limiting some of the promises around it or what have you, I think.
Yeah, so what problem is this the solution to yet again? I'm going to bring our second panel to a close. So one more round of applause for Carrie, Nikki, and Amal.